Good morning. The City of Southport Board of Aldermen special meeting, October 11th, 2023, is now called to order. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you to those who are watching virtually. I would like to call on Reverend Alderman Lowe Davis for our invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Before you get into a prayerful position, today is the 69th anniversary of Hurricane Hazel. Now, it actually hit Southport, I believe, on the 15th, but it hit South Carolina and started making its terrible way up the coast. It got to us, and I want to call your attention to what I'm showing you, of course, is a picture. Mr. Harrelson may recognize where this is. And 69 years ago, Our State magazine, something that we should all be proud of in this state, has one of the best pieces of newspaper writing I've ever read, or journalism writing, and it was published about 4 or 5 years ago by Michael Graff. You can easily find it by Googling Our State and Hurricane Hazel story. It will come up and you won't be able to put it down, and especially since we live here. And so I have a particular prayer for today. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we ask that you look with compassion on us, as well as on all those in vulnerable areas who year after year must face the ongoing threat of hurricanes and other calamities. Give us the wisdom to make adequate preparations and the strength of character to acknowledge our dependence on your grace and favor. Guide us, protect us, and keep us, we pray, in safety and peace all our days. Amen.
Amen. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Alderman Davis, and I hope that prayer includes no hurricanes come this way the rest of the season. Next on the agenda, I would like to read the ethics statement. If any members know of any conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest concerning matters on the agenda, please so state at this time. Any conflicts, Board?
Yeah, I have a conflict regarding J1.
Closed session. Okay, thank you. Duly noted. Thank you. Next item, item D, is approval of the agenda, and we have one agenda item, and that is Shoreline Stabilization Project. I'll entertain a motion. A motion and a second by Alderman Lombardi. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Before we get into the presentation, I just have brief remarks. This is not the first meeting concerning Southport waterfront and the challenges of erosion control and shoreline stabilization, and it will not be the last. I'm sure many of you have read the 2014 report, Southport Waterfront Project, Alternatives for Shoreline Stabilization. And as you all remember, the September 16, 2014, members of the Waterfront Steering Committee, it was chaired by Tommy Harrelson, and members were Bill Duke, B.J. Gorman, Harley Lemons, Paul Swinson, Frank Marchetti, and Paul Fisher. So we thank them for beginning this process, and with that board and under Mayor Robert Howard. So we continue on the September 10th, 2015 Board of Aldermen meeting. There was a Waterfront Steering Committee presentation, and they talked about the 6 segments, and you'll hear about that today. Segment 1 at the yacht basin, where there was no shoreline stabilization structures there. Segment 3, Southport Main Waterfront, where there is a bulkhead. And then we have Segment 6 from down at the Bonnet Creek area. So there have been meetings on this, and many of you will remember the meeting at the fire station. Many of you may have been there. And it was discussion, the big discussion was the effect that the Ballhead Island Ferry was having on contributing to erosion, the speed of the ferry producing waves, much more so than the big ships coming by. And Captain Roy Daniel showed photos of before and after the years of erosion that had occurred. And so it was wave action and storms and rising sea level. It's just multiple reasons for why our waterfront is looking the way it is. And then I just want to bring you up to date. In December of 2021, we had the check presentation by Representative Miller, $5 million available to the city. And then July 14th, 2022, selection of engineering. This board has been very involved in this project. It just takes time. And then the January 12th meeting, the city manager was authorized to sign a contract in 2023. And then in February 27th, 2023, there was a special meeting just on the waterfront stabilization project. So this board has been active in moving forward. Sometimes it just does not go as fast as we would like. But now that, and then those of you remember Mr. Hargrove, the city manager, if you saw his board, the number one project on his board, a list of projects, was waterfront stabilization. So it's always been there. I talked about it in the city newsletter in February of 2021, how we were going to move forward. So what's different now? What's different now is we have engineers, and they are the most underappreciated discipline. I'll say it every meeting. There is. You can name 5 actors. You can't name 5 engineers. And without engineers, no highways, no bridges, no TV, no cell phones, no electricity, no water, nothing. So I thank the engineers on our city staff. Mr. Jarvis, thank you. So we have engineers and we have funding. We have money. We have $5 million available. So that's what's different now. So I look forward to the presentations. I want to thank this board for their being very active in continuing to pursue this project, and I'll turn it over to City Manager Bonnie Therrien.
In the interest of time, because I know some board members have to leave, I'm turning it over to Bob Jarvis.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. And I'll get right to it. As the mayor implied, most of us are very familiar with the Shoreline Stabilization Project. It has been around for quite some time. However, for those in attendance or those who may be listening at home who aren't intimately familiar with the project and the reasons that we're here today, the Cape Fear River shoreline in Southport's highly eroded due to the long-term effects of wind-caused wave action and wave action from boats and ship traffic, as well as the ongoing effects of the rise in sea levels. And the shoreline degradation is only increasing as those sea levels rise and as the frequency and the size of the boats and ships in the area increases. So the city's moving forward with preparing and design and permitting documents for the Shoreline Stabilization and Restoration Project that will mitigate the impacts of the wave action and the sea levels on that shoreline. And we've been working with Olson Associates for quite some time now on the design and permitting of the project. They're a highly regarded coastal engineering firm, and they're certainly no stranger to our area here. Olson has recently performed hydrographic and topographic surveys of the area, of the project area, as well as a cultural resource survey of the project area. And they're developing their scope and fee for the next phase of the work, which is the schematic design and permitting phase of the work. Chris Creed with Olson Associates is here to provide an update on the results of that work that they have done so far, and he's also going to describe their expected work effort and schedule for the next phase of the design and permitting work. And since we know funding for the project is somewhat limited, we do have a significant amount of funding, but we know that it may not accomplish all of the goals that we've set forth for the project. Determining appropriate project phasing is going to be critical to the success in addressing the priorities of the city. So we're asking for some input and direction from the board regarding their preference today for phasing of the project if that becomes necessary. And during the design and permitting phase, we'll assess the available funding and we'll determine how much of the design permitting effort is appropriate to proceed with based on that funding and the improvements that we can likely get accomplished. If the board has any input and direction regarding the design and permitting scope, we'd be happy to consider that as well. The city as attorney has been consulted regarding the issues that may arise regarding riparian ownership by individuals within the project rights and the impact that the project may have on those riparian rights. He's opined somewhat, and his opinions and the results of his cursory review of the design concepts are included in your packet today. And without further ado, I will introduce Chris Creed with Olson Associates, who will lead us through their efforts to date and spell out what we would like to accomplish in the future.
Thanks, Bob. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone again. I'd also like to introduce Greg Finch with the Davy Group, group out of Wilmington. They used to be called the Land Management Group. And Greg is on our team to assist the city with the regulatory task for whatever project is advanced from the discussions that go on. I'd like to speak a little bit back to the anniversary of Hurricane Hazel because it makes me feel old. I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in Dunn, North Carolina, and my mom is still there. And I went to NC State undergrad. But when I was a child, my grandfather owned the westernmost house on Long Beach, on the ocean, on the sound side, and that's where I grew up. It's called Oak Island now. The house is still there, surrounded by mansions. But I grew up there, and he had an old surplus Jeep that he would load up with fishing poles, and we would ride through the dunes. The lock would fall in it and go fishing over there. So, speaking of Hurricane Hazel, that was the storm of record when I was a child. That's what everybody talked about, and he bought that home right after Hazel had impacted the area, and everybody was rebuilding from that event, which I always put that experience in my life directed me to what I do today. And so, and that is, I'm a coastal engineer. I went to NC State undergrad. I have a master's in coastal and ocean engineering from the University of Delaware, and that took me to Jacksonville, Florida, where I've spent my entire career. But I've worked all over the southeastern United States, from Virginia to Alabama, during that process. And obviously, most of our practice is focused in Florida, which is kind of ground zero for coastal engineering in the southeast because of the amount of money they spend on their beaches. So what I'd like to do, it's just a follow-up. Some of the stuff is repetitive from what we talked about in February, but we have refined it a little bit. And I don't know if anybody, it might be best if you could turn and be able to see the slides in a comfortable position. Might be most helpful, and that would accommodate our conversation today. And so we're going to talk about some things we've learned since some work that has gone on since I last spoke to you, and some ideas about some potential path forward and some pros and cons of those, and ultimately seeking guidance from the board with respect to what we want to do, what you want to do with the money that you have available to you. So we'll start out again. You know, we talked about. As everyone knows, things are more expensive now. And so expectations about what this might cost 5 years ago are very different than what we might find today, particularly in the marine construction business. It's very complicated. Okay. It's a complicated process, and particularly the location of this. And so there's just mobilization, getting equipment here and accessing the site will contribute to the great expense that would be expected for this. So we're talking about from the left from left to right, left being west, right being east. The mostly sand beach is on that western area of the city shoreline, what I call the mostly sand beach. That way I've drawn it, it does include that U.S. Army Corps of Engineer revetment around the lift station. Then we talk about walls and revetment. That's that center part where we have the wooden walls around the city park and also along the road. That is a revetment. A wall is something that's vertical, made either steel, wood, or vinyl sheeting. A revetment is a rock slope structure, and that's a distinction between those. And then to the far east, in the private community or the private parcel area, are the walls and what I call living shoreline, and I'll have some photographs of that. That's the area where we have a little rock sill, and we've got some grass growing behind that, which is a hugely beneficial feature, not only just from the environmental effect to it, but it does have a pretty significant shore protection benefit as well. So let's talk about we're going to talk about the projects in these categories here. Just everybody knows what this looks like, hopefully. This is the sand revetment. This is the one to the left or to the westmost, the sand and the Corps' revetment there that was constructed around the lift station. Then we move into the vertical walls. You can see off in the distance past the pier and the rock sloping revetment. And then we're going to move into a little further to the east where we have the private walls and the living shoreline where we have a small rock sill and the grass growing between the rock sill and the walls, which is, I don't know who did this, but it was a good idea back in the day. It clearly has been there for a long time, and it's something to build on, I believe, for some potential future work, particularly given the conditions that Bob mentioned with sea level rise and other influences that way. As you move forward, in fact, they're probably just going to get exacerbated with the sea level rise and more frequent vessel traffic. So site conditions real quick, we all know this, everything's eroding. And the erosional stress is dealing with storm surge, these what appears to be more frequent storms that the whole southeast of the U.S. is experiencing these days, not only in Florida, but eastern North Carolina is a prime target also. The wind waves, you got a large body of water in front of you, particularly during these storms when we have elevated water conditions and strong winds on top of that, you can really get some significant wind wave effects there. And the ship and boat generated waves obviously contribute to it as well. And so I don't think this is going to be a situation where we are going to build something to try to put it back where it was in the past. We're going to have to implement a strategy that accommodates these erosional stresses so that you don't have future impacts from them. Another concern that we have moving forward that we're still learning about what that actually will look like is we know that there's a ongoing effort to deepen the Wilmington Harbor again. That's not inconsistent with every other port on the east coast of the United States. And that will increase the channel depth, but most importantly, it is intended to accommodate larger ships and more frequent ships. This is why they're doing that, which will just put more pressure on your shoreline. And we can talk about some of the potential strategy benefits with that with future funding. And then sea level rise, everyone's familiar with it. It is happening, and we're seeing in the records now that this is occurring. We do a lot of work in South Florida, Broward County, Miami-Dade County, Palm Beach County. And that's kind of ground zero. These people are living with it. It's in their face right now. And some of the other communities in this part of the state, in South Carolina, North Carolina, don't see an immediate effect from it. It happens maybe occasionally, like in the lower part of the city right now. You might see some more frequent flooding in that low part. But in Southeast Florida, they're really dealing with it, and they're ahead of the curve. And as a side, your resiliency planning may be something that the city ultimately has to start thinking about as well, in addition to just shoreline improvements. This is going to be focused principally on shoreline improvements, but communities in situations like the city of Southport are moving forward with resiliency planning on how are you going to live with 1, 2, 3 feet increases in sea level rise over the next 50 to 100 years. It's hard to adjust to that. I'm still on my side. It's hard to adjust to that when it happens, so advanced planning is important. All right, I'll stop on that. It's important to understand we do have some competing interests here, the Wilmington Harbor Federal Channel, the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway, and the Marina Basin, and there also is a federal channel. The red lines delineate those federal improvements that are authorized by Congress. Most importantly, it's really not that far to Wilmington Harbor, where the ships, when you talk about wave generation and wave propagation to the edge of that channel, something to keep in mind as these ships get bigger. And so this is what we've done recently. In the last time we did some work, we had a pretty limited budget, and we weren't able to really do a detailed hydrographic survey. This time I was a lot more aggressive. I was not happy with the amount of information we had last time. I felt like it left us some vulnerability in our understanding of the quantities for some of these alternatives and what they may cost, but also just what it looked like offshore of Southport. And that's an important design consideration. So this is a fuzzy graphic. I can provide anybody the hard copy of this who wants it, so you can study it a little more. All the little black dots are actually numbers that are the depths. And it was done with multi-beam technology, so this is a complete coverage. That's why you have all these intricate details of what the bottom looks like. Red is shallow, blue is deep. And so it's interesting. There is a meander in the lower Cape Fear River, not just the channel, right offshore of Southport. And that bowed blue is kind of the outer edge of the curved channel. And it might be possible, we won't have enough data to know, but in most instances, these meanders migrate. And it could be that historically this has migrated closer to the Southport over time, which may have contributed to some of the things that we've seen change over the last half century. So just to kind of put this all in perspective, I tried to trace the 20-foot contour. And so on the western side, over the Sand Beach area, or the far western to the left, you can see it's pretty shallow offshore of that portion of the Southport shoreline. But when you go further west, particularly when you get past the road and where you get into the private homes, the 20-foot contour is very close. In most instances, right at the ends of those people's docks. That's 20 feet is deep when you talk about shore protection planning. And so this is a pretty significant consideration. And even in the middle portion of the city, when we looked at this last time, I was not comfortable with what the depths were represented in the survey we had. And it really gave me some caution about what we were proposing in that area, because I've always felt it could be deeper than what the survey suggested, and that will affect project design, project performance, project cost, and everything. As you get deeper, it takes more materials to build what you want to do, and it's going to be exposed to more significant conditions, larger waves, stronger currents, and things like that. So this is an important finding that we've gotten. We finally received this after our last survey, after our last meeting. So this information will be used to advance the design or a design update of an alternative that's ultimately selected. And we may find that it ultimately, the information in the survey affects decision making on what we do in particular areas. Another interesting thing, which I think this is the most interesting thing, because given the history of Southport, Dr. Gordon Watts from Little Washington is a known expert in the nation with marine archaeology, and he did the cultural resource investigation for us, a marine cultural resource investigation, to identify potentially culturally significant resources that exist along the Southport shoreline. And that's important when we go to start just disturbing things and building things and digging things up, maybe where we have to avoid and where we can work. It's interesting to know that the most significant resources were pretty limited within the project footprint. There is this old wreck, the Roland, and there are some other things that need to be avoided, but placing a project on top of a culturally significant resource is not necessarily a problem. But if you were to excavate it, that does become a problem. But this will all be reviewed in the regulatory review of whatever plan is advanced. So this information that was developed here was intentional to support our ultimate regulatory effort. So, rewinding back to what we've had conversations with the previous boards here on what the goals are. and these can still be discussed, and we may want to talk about them a little more as we move through this conversation. Obviously, comprehensive shore stabilization. We want it to stop eroding. We want the flooding to stop. We want the impacts and the damages to stop, to particularly walls and things like that. We want to protect from continued erosion and land loss, from whatever those forces are that might be contributing to that. We want to advance and protect the environment to the extent we can within this, or at least minimize the impact to it with whatever project that we move forward. Increased recreational value. That was a pretty big thing that was talked about when we did our first set of screenings of these alternatives, and access to the water and maybe a longshore access too was important. And that's why if you go back to those alternatives, or a lot of these incremental structures, and I'll show in a minute, that's what that was intended to do. But it might be something we have to talk about, and it might not still be a feasible thing to think about. And then another benefit would be improving the living shoreline features, which are the ones on the west end. That has lots of things. Clearly, they're good. They're a very popular thing, particularly within regulatory agencies right now. And by including those, we feel like that might help with the review of the permit application, which this is a very aggressive type project here. So anything that we can do. Pre-hazel condition. I throw this up there. I got this out of Dr. Gordon Watt's report. Thought this was an interesting story. It's like, okay, where was the shoreline? Where do we want it to be now? And how would that compare to this? I don't think it's going to look anything like that again. But it is an interesting photograph, if anyone's not ever seen this, of what it used to look like in 1954. Dr. Watts' report has been provided to the city, and it is available to you if you just want to take it home and read it. It's really interesting. But we will look at this as we redo some of these alternatives and look at it and see, is there any way we could replicate what it might have looked like in the past. But even in this photograph, you can see something that's pretty interesting from bottom to top, west being the bottom, where you see the sand beach, but it does transition to the marsh shoreline as you go further north. And so we still see that today, but it might need some help to maintain that. And that's what the living shoreline approach and the concept is for that. We see sand beach along the center of the island. That sand beach has now been lost, principally because of the continued erosion and the creation of the walls, the construction of the walls along the center portion of the city. And once you build the walls and revetments, pretty much the beaches disappear. So, but once you build infrastructure, you got to protect it. So we want to understand the project scope for whatever conditions that we have. We got a nice, good description now of what those conditions are, particularly with the updated survey. We want to develop these alternatives based on the goals and also the constraints. Constraints at this point in time being funding is your biggest constraint, but let's maybe think about this might not be your only shot at funding in this, particularly given the potential port deepening activities. And is there some potential additional money that might come from some mitigation activities that would be associated with that project, particularly if it can be demonstrated that action is going to have an adverse impact to your shoreline? Should the Corps be on the hook and the port be on the hook to mitigate or protect the city of Southport from whatever they're doing to that port channel? And so that's something to keep in mind and explore as we continue to track the progress on that project. And incorporate existing shoreline protection features. You know, we're taking examples from the core revetment, what that looks like, and also the living shoreline. And how do we put this all together? So the alternatives in the simplest form is to do nothing, which everyone I think has understood that's not acceptable, but we always talk about it because you compare that to what these alternatives are. The sand beach to the west, doing some type of breakwater treatment in sand beach in the center and the living shoreline to the east. Or we've also talked about just revetting the shoreline and then coming up with a living shoreline solution to the west. I don't think you want to abandon that living shoreline area, and what you want to expand it as much as you can. So the conversation is really what you're going to do in that central portion and the western portion is really where we're going to have to make some decisions on what to do. This was what we called option one in our past study. It was the most aggressive treatment of the shoreline. It's the easiest to draw, the most difficult to permit and build, I would say. And so, but it did meet most of the project goals that were established last time because it provides shore protection. It provides access to the water. It provides a longshore access along the community, along the central, most public area of the city's shoreline. We're completely sticking with the living shoreline, expanding it a little bit in the green area there to the west. And along those areas are where there are some docks, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of that in a little bit. But again, this needs to be reevaluated based upon this new survey that we have. Is this still even a feasible project that can be constructed and maintained? I don't know, based upon what I've seen with this updated data, and it needs to be revisited and re-explored to understand, is the water so deep offshore, right off those bulkheads, can we build and maintain those structures? And we don't know that yet. Well, you got to go through the, I mean, I haven't done it yet. It's going to be part of a process of the next step to take this information we have and compare these alternatives to that new information. And we'll obviously, as mentioned, there'll have to be other meetings. We'll have to come back and say, hey, here's what we found. And this is how, if this is still really a go, how much will this cost and how difficult will it be to permit and build? And there are some nuances to that. Some other things, this is another kind of the minimalist type approach we talked about, which is let's keep the living shoreline pretty much as a given. Let's not do anything to the western area where we have the sand beach, where I believe you guys have some emergency work going on right now because of the problems with the road. But let's just revet that center portion, tied into the Corps revetment, and just carry that all the way down. Fix the revetment in front of the road. Actually, the revetment in front of the road the rock sizes are too small. And I think that's why you see repetitive impacts to that and changes to that when you do have these storms. That needs to be engineered and reconstructed to a more appropriate type of revetment if that's a path that we would take. It would, yeah, you could. That's a good base, and you could reshape that, but you need stones that are large enough. Stone stability is based off mass and under wave impacts, and so those stones are too small. There's a whole analysis that you can do. It's very old. The Hudson equation is what you use, and it works. Yes, ma'am.
What size rocks are we talking about, or stones are we talking about?
Well, if you go to the shoreline and you look at what there's two examples on your shoreline. There's the Corps revetment, where they used all the Corps manuals in the Hudson equation. That's in the Corps of Engineers Coastal Engineering Manual. That's what they use, and that's the rock size they picked using that analysis. And then you can go look at the revetment along the road, and they are significantly smaller than the other ones. And so we see changes going on the revetment at the road. Nothing's happening at that Corps revetment. It's stable and it's not going anywhere. So those rocks at the Corps revetment might be a little over-designed, but they need to be larger. And so if a revetment approach is considered, that would be a good thing to do, is to fix that revetment. I have not seen that. I've not seen any information on that. So, but I'll go look at it later this morning. I'll swing by and take a look.
Who was involved in choosing the stone that's currently in front of the road? Do we have an engineer involved?
I think
in
it's
that?
been there a long time.
It's not. It's been there a couple of years, if that.
Talking about in front of the garrison, so we're talking about in front of Fort Johnston.
Yeah.
That's relatively
Yeah, I'm
new.
not sure. I was not involved in that.
Right.
Yeah.
We contracted it out, yes. And I'll say this, the stone hasn't moved in the past 4 storms.
Okay.
You know, the previous stone did in 2016, but when we redid it, maybe 2018, it has not moved.
Okay, maybe that's that. I'm thinking about past
Previous,
complaints
yeah.
about it was moving.
But no, it has not moved since 2018.
Okay, so that we haven't considered that as well, and that needs to be evaluated too. If the revetment approach is the path you take, what we did last time is didn't really when we advanced this proposal, we were just burying what you did and we weren't worried about it. So we didn't spend a lot of time with it. So, but if a revetment approach and sustaining that needs to be investigated, determined about suitability or any modifications that might be required, maybe nothing. And so that would be good. But we do know that, you know, the red line representing where a revetment might go, to the left side of that red line, around the wooden bulkheads, is where we see some repeated impacts. The wall is low. We get wave overtopping during these storms. We get scour behind the wall, failure of the wall in some places. There needs to be something done in that area to reduce those impacts. So that's something that would be included in a plan. Then we're going to come up to the composite that as we're kind of boiling it down in my mind to 3 options now. We got this guy, we got something like this, and then we got this composite, and maybe we just boil it down to 2. Maybe we have this and this, and we skip the middle one. So, yes.
Will you go back inside for me, please?
We gotta use mics, Dan.
I got a loud voice. Can everybody hear me okay?
No, the people back home can't.
Oh, can't, okay. Can I use that mic?
Yep.
Sorry, please.
That's all right.
All right, here, I'll use yours.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, or I would like for you to just explain in the previous slide about the wave attenuation, because the jacks-looking structures, I don't think most people in the room understand what that is when you say option 1. If you look at the triangle-type structures, those are wave revetments or current
Yeah,
revetments,
I've got some
right?
photographs.
Okay,
of this.
good.
Yeah, I've got some photographs of these. So let's go to that real quick. So here's the option. I got some photographs. This is what these things look like. This is what we're talking about. To the top on the left side, this is an Olson project, probably 20 years old now, around Fort Clinch State Park on the northern end, right on the Florida-Georgia border. That's a historic fort, and you can see and these crenulate, these little curved beaches between the breakwaters, and we have these gaps. The reason I show this photograph is because this shoreline is pretty similar to what we're dealing with in Southport. There's a federal navigation project right offshore of this, and actually it's even larger than the civil federal. Kings Bay sub base is right there also, so the channel is very deep. There's lots of ship traffic, lots of boat traffic here. And so this has been very successful, but you can see how close the gaps are. It's a very structure-intensive treatment of that shoreline, but it was intended that corner that was closest to the fort was about to fall in before we did this project. State of Florida, the Park Service paid for the work, and it has been super successful. But I show this photograph so that we can, in our mind, when we talk about alternatives, what these look like. A revetment is top right. That is what a revetment looks like. You guys have a couple examples on your shoreline too. These are common treatments to protect a shoreline, but you will not have a beach seaward of these structures. Beaches and revetments are not compatible, and if there is any beach there, it likely will scour down and it will be gone. But you will fix the other problem with shore protection. And then the living shoreline at the bottom, that is a photograph from Southport. And that is the rocks in the middle of the photograph, the dark area that someone has placed previously, and landward of that is the Spartina Marsh. And so the reason you have to have the rocks, Spartina Marsh will disappear in high energy wave environments. And that's why you see a lot of marsh erosion in the lower Cape Fear River. Sea level rise, more frequent ship traffic, particularly with ships, it just goes away. So as part of most of these living shoreline projects, they call them gray-green solutions, you have to put these structures in front of them to reduce the wave energy so the grass can be sustainable. And so if you go back to our alternative, there is an expansion of the rocks to address the wave energy issue so the grass can exist behind it. So that's what a living shoreline. So these 3 types of approaches are what we are talking about in terms of the options that are going to be considered along the 3 groups. So we would be talking about to the left, the sand beach structures, breakwaters. We like to call them breakwaters in North Carolina because groins are not looked at very favorably. revetment and living shoreline. So let's go back to this option here. So to the sand/breakwaters to the left, the revetment in the middle, and the living shoreline is what this composite option would look like. There's some potential issues that we'll need to consider also with this riparian problem that we have, and the legal issues that are dealt with these private landowners that are most concentrated in the right side area along the living shoreline, and in the left side area. There are a couple of private landowners over there as well, where if we were to improve the beach there with the structures in the sand, there could be some issues with those owners as well, and how that might affect their rights. So that's something that we need to navigate in the regulatory process, because the state may not take action until those things are handled. So when we talk about phasing, and the ways to spend some of this money fast would be to prioritize areas, pick a solution that can be implemented relatively quickly with the least amount of regulatory and legal problems. Might be something that we need to talk about.
Since we have a clock ticking on the 5 million, we have to spend it by 2026,
Yes, sir.
then for all of the processing and permitting and yada yada that we have to do for this, how long is the permitting going to take? It's at least a year, right?
At least a year. Turn to the expert for that. But it will also, like revetment will be easier to permit than the breakwater sand thing. So it'll also, the schedule will be dependent upon the complexity of that. And so there might have to be some decisions made about that.
When the alarm goes off, we give whatever's left over back to the state. So I just want to make sure we spend it all.
Right. I don't believe there's enough money to do it all. And so, I think everybody needs to go in this with that understanding. Now, is this the last bit of money that the city's going to get? Maybe not. And if you show, I was talking to Bob earlier, if the city adopts a policy that you intend to protect the entire shoreline from point to point, even though you don't have enough money to do it now, it would give you, you could consider that as a basis of seeking additional funding as you move forward, as opposed to just doing a piecemeal type approach. Your goal is to protect everything and to fix everything. So that's my recommendation.
So for
something to
clarification on that, you're talking about going basically from American Fish all the way down to the landing. Is having a plan to do that? Is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about the 4,000 feet right here,
Okay.
right now.
All right.
But obviously, but like a lot of these projects, particularly where you have limited funding, it's great to show progress, show intent and show progress. And that way you have an intent to start working on it. You know you've got limited funding, but hey, we're going to get started and we're not going to wait to see if we're going to get additional money. And so the decisions will be made on what might be the overall plan or ultimate goal that could evolve in time, but also what are your immediate priorities is something that you may want to talk about as well. And then that could fall into how do you go about the permitting process? Do you permit the whole thing or do you permit it in pieces? And Greg and I have talked about strategies with that, and we don't necessarily have to answer those questions today, but it's something that needs to be part of the conversation. So let's go back to the pictures. Let's see what else I've got to talk about. So yeah, so this gets into some of the things that we're going to have to consider. Obviously, the water depths concern me. Seaward of the project shoreline, they do vary along shore. The riparian ownership is something that's going to, a hurdle that's going to have to be jumped. The future port deepening, it is important. We still don't understand. There have been some studies by others that have suggested there will be impacts to the Southport shoreline, maybe not all of it, but there are ongoing conversations with the Corps right now that we, full disclosure, we work for the Village of Bald Head Island also, and so we are tracking that for them. I've been sharing information I've been getting with the city about meetings that are coming up just so you guys can stay up to date on what's going on with that. Future sea level rise is important. How do you plan for that? Do you plan for 100 years from now, or do you take an adaptive management strategy? There can be composites of that where we'll do it at this level now. We'll plan for 20 or 30. I think the state of North Carolina has adopted a 30-year policy of planning right now. Every state's a little bit different. do you plan for that now? What's the water level expected to be 30 years from now? Build that. And you watch it. If it changes, you adjust in the future. Obviously, available funding is an issue, and obviously, phase considerations will need to be an important part also, given the funding limitations. So the next step, and I throw this out as a 2 to 3 year effort, because that's all inclusive. That would get you to the end of construction, at least phase 1. I have purposely made the top text big and the lower text small, because I think the top part's the most difficult. It is picking a plan. The design level stuff, once the plan is picked, is not necessarily that difficult. It's just a process you have to go through. We would have a pre-app meeting with the agencies. That's all state and all federal agencies, and they would give us feedback on that. And that the plan you may want to change it based upon some of the feedback we get. We've already gotten some preliminary feedback on the old one, and there are some concerns floating around out there. And then permit application agent coordination with the ultimate goal of getting a permit to do something. And once you have that permit, going through plans and specs and development, bid advertisement, contractor selection, and construction should be pretty straightforward. Obviously, once the bid advertisement comes back, we might have to make some adjustments to the project plan based on cost. But we will work with the market and the industry to try to understand what those cost order of magnitude might be before we finalize a plan. And then there will also be some post-construction reporting and monitoring. So the big steps are the first ones. You've got to get started. We need to pick a plan. That may involve putting it back in our office to go through a redesign process and update the expected cost, and then maybe break the cost into phases. Okay, this section of the project would cost this, the middle section would cost that, and the other section would cost that. And then you can look at the 3-4 alternatives, whatever you guys maybe ultimately direct us to do, and we could express concerns, particularly with that one where we're getting those T-head structures, those breakwaters out into deeper water. And what's that going to do to cost and expected long-term performance? That's a priority to do. And then once a plan is selected, and even and conversations about phasing, we would then advance to the permit application phase. So getting to that application is your immediate goal. It's selecting a plan and getting to an application.
So to make sure that I'm clear, because we all get asked these questions all the time. For the westernmost portion, a living shoreline is not appropriate for that piece of land right there?
Gosh, I mean, I guess you could. I mean, I've tried to, kind of going back to that.
I'm not suggesting that. I just want to be able to say yay or nay.
Well, the design approach I've taken up until this point is trying to respond to what current conditions are. Well, there's a sand beach over there. Let's stick with that.
Okay.
There's a living shoreline over here. Let's stick with that.
And
you could force it and change it if that's a goal.
No, you've answered my question. But the structures that are theoretically on the plan now would add sand to the beach. Is that not true?
Yes. You would have to do that, yeah. Well,
So some of that, one of the legal issues is who owns the beach then?
that's correct.
Okay, we would have to work that issue out.
That's correct. That's going to have to be dealt with.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Can I?
Well, does anybody have a comment? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering, if you take a permit out for the entire project, is that good until the project is completed, or do you have to renew that?
Turn it over to Greg.
Yeah, a CAMA major permit is good for 5 years, and the Corps permit is 5 years, but they don't overlap. They can have different times. So, but if you've begun work, or even if you haven't and you have a good reason why you haven't begun work within that time, it sounds like that's not going to be an issue with the funding. So you'll have started work, then you can apply for a permit renewal and get it extended. Those aren't guaranteed, and you can't do it indefinitely into the future, but for some period you can get permit renewals, yes.
We do know a comment that has come back from the agencies is with the issue of putting sand on the beach is what impact will it be to the marina, to the west end? There's periodic dredging that's required there. It's a federal channel, and so there is some liability to the feds. I don't know if they are ever funded to do that dredging, or if the city does the dredging on your own. There's never any federal money in that? The yacht basin, yeah.
Yeah, he's talking about the yacht basin.
The yacht
That-
basin. That's
right.
what they're concerned.
We're-
That was expressed to us in a pre-app meeting we had 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, we're currently, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but we're currently working on getting it dredged, the yacht basin dredged. The Corps never has funding for the small projects. We're like down here in their funding process.
they're
So the
typically
city
funded
is,
with the city.
yeah, well, in the past, it hasn't. In the past, the Corps did do it. That has happened in the past, but for years, they're
Okay.
not having the funding.
Part
So
of that has
we're
to do with
being
the
proactive about it.
When we lost the shrimpers, we got one now. When we lost the commercial part, the Corps puts that way down on the list. I used to own property that was commercial, and when the commercial part ended up down here, the Corps walked away from it, and they said, yeah, it's still on the chart, but we're not going to do it because we're there for the commercial aspect of it. So I think that's part of the discussion points.
Yeah, there has to be, benefit cost ratio, that's what the Corps does. There has to be, the benefits to, it's typically quantified in commercial type stuff for navigation. So that may or may not continue to be an issue, particularly if it's the city's responsibility. And it may be just something, hey, if the city were to change conditions based upon your project, you'd be responsible for it. But we put that sand on the beach behind those structures. The structures would stabilize that sand. It's not just going to sweep away because of that, particularly on that portion of the shoreline. It's good. Those structures will hold it there. And actually, the structures tend to be sand attractors, the way that we build these breakwaters. And you can see from that Fort Clinch picture, occasionally from maintenance dredging, they put some sand back in the structure, but it's typically to the north of it, or to the west in this picture, at the top of the picture. And rarely do they have to put sand in those structures. They lock it down and it stays there. And so that would just be something we have to demonstrate in the regulatory process if we get on that path.
I'm asking a question here.
Sure.
It does not generate new sand. So there was one discussion where they were going to put these little walls in. Basically, I guess they wouldn't come up higher than low tide. When the wave came over and when it washed away, it would drop the sand there and add a beach to it.
There's no source of sand for that to happen.
Okay,
Yeah, there's no sand coming to the Southport shoreline.
right.
Maybe there was 200 years ago, but now there's not, and a lot of it has to do with the dredging around it. The sand you have is a sand and typically any sand on your beaches is there because it's eroding out of the upland as the beach goes back. So it's not coming from adjacent areas like it does on Oak Island or somewhere else. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. That's all I got. And so I wanted to open that up for discussion. And I don't know, any final comments, Bob, or?
Mayor, if I can real quick, I think the big thing, because I know Alderman Carroll has to leave, what is it that you want the board to make decisions on today? Because I know in November, we want to bring the Phase 2 design money contract to all of you. So what do you need from them today to make that decision so we can get that to them in November so we can expedite this?
Thank you. Certainly, we want to get the board's input on the potential phasing of the project. In as much as we don't have funding currently to construct all of the, I think Chris outlined perhaps 3 phases, 3 different treatments. We'd certainly like to get the board's input on where to concentrate our activities through the design and potentially construction process. And certainly if the board has any direction right now on what it'd like to see as far as the treatments go, we'll have to vet these during the design process. But if the board has any input there, it will help us going along. And certainly your input on phasing will help us as Olson develops their scope and their fee going forward for the next phase. So I think that we'd like to have the discussion regarding that phasing and regarding potential treatments that the board would like to see.
The discussion a couple weeks ago about the emergency wrap that we were going to put in.
Correct.
My understanding was we were told that you should start downriver and work your way upriver. Did I walk away with the right perception?
Well, I'll allow Mr. Creed to elaborate on that, but I think that's potentially a correct assumption, yes.
Okay. So that would help
To be honest, I'm not familiar with what's going on there.
So one of the questions we had is, we have a part that's washing away the sidewalk in the street. So we're going to put some stone in there. It's going to be wrapped around. It's supposed to catch the waves and kick it out so we don't wash the next guy's property away. During that conversation, my takeaway was that when we do projects like this, all things equal, you start at the low end, the far end of the water flow, and you work your way up. Is that needed to be that way?
If you're dealing with purely sand beaches and things like that, that could be a consideration.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're potentially talking about in the middle of this project just doing a revetment. That's not going to have an influence on the sand transport.
So it wouldn't make any difference if we do, the section 3 seems to be pretty stable at the moment, of the 3 sections.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, 1 and 2 are the priorities.
Correct.
One of the other issues is, could we do 1 and get it done before the clock runs out on the 5 million? Or do we do 2 because that's when the clock, we'll be able to accomplish that before the clock runs out?
I can't answer that mainly because I think the biggest issues in 1 and 3 are the legal issues with the riparian.
Okay.
On the private properties.
So we could
those
actually do
those can be handled.
Yeah.
The engineering parts, I think, is going to be easy compared to that. And
Okay.
so, but everyone's going to benefit from this, even the private property owners. Now, I think the question is, and that's pretty easy to demonstrate. There's going to be a physical benefit, but what does that do to their riparian rights? And I don't know that that's clear yet. And then if the project does something eliminated from their private property rights by doing this? I think the law in North Carolina is pretty unique on that. I haven't seen that happen in other states, and so I think we just need to make sure how you can navigate that if there's a right eliminated, if I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, that any property owner who would agree with that is okay with that, or if there's find another way to approach this that whose rights are not changed.
Elaborate on what the riparian rights are in North Carolina that are unique.
The best I understand them, again, full disclosure, I'm not a lawyer, it is, in the way it has been explained to me, and Greg, I don't know if you can, it may add to me if I get this wrong, but it has to do, if there's state money, if there's public money spent to improve the beach or shoreline seaward of that property, then that person then does not have rights to the water any longer the way they would otherwise. And I think the biggest issue is people building docks across that. And so, because they still would have access, they can just walk out there and do whatever they would do normally, but it would be, can they physically build or reconstruct, which I understand that it might even affect the reconstruction of a dock should it be impacted from a storm. And so, we've sought legal input on this, and there's a briefing memo in the back, I think, of your agenda packet, and there will have to be a conclusion reached on that, I think, even before we go to the permit phase for those areas where it potentially impacts that.
To summarize, if a private property owner says, yes, you can do this, then that private property owner is forfeiting the right to that property, no longer will own it.
Depending on the scope of what you do seaward of them, we believe we may be able to get around that on the western edge if we don't put any fill there. If we just go put some rocks out there and maybe plant grass and let it fill in naturally just through sedimentation and things like that, it may be that we're able to avoid it there. But on that western end in Area 1, we got a pretty aggressive, we're going to build some structures, we're going to put some sand there. What does that do to them? The issue was raised last time on the western end when we were with the marsh, even putting fill in there to recreate the marsh. Does that eliminate their rights? I don't know the law is that clear, and we need more input from legal counsel, I think, before we can make a conclusion. But it needs to be investigated more. It shouldn't prohibit you from investigating these alternatives, understanding what these approaches are they feasible, and how much are they going to cost, potentially. I think that is your next logical step, and then we can work with Greg's team and back to you guys and staff of turning to what type of strategy from a regulatory standpoint do we go. That would be maybe the best way to proceed.
Another question, just further clarity. What are the options we would be voting on today?
I'm not sure you need to, unless you want to vote on them, or if you can just direct, staff to reconsider the previous options or a refined list of those options. I defer to you guys to maybe be more specific on what you might be helpful.
What are you looking for from us?
As I mentioned, I think what we would like to do is get some sense of prioritization that the board may have as far as phasing the project. Is it in the city's best interest to consider the east end, the central portion where the revetment and bulkhead is considered, or the west end? What is your priority as to what you'd like to see? And certainly if there is any, I don't want to say it would take a vote, but if there's any direction that you could give on types of treatment that the city would like to see, that would aid the design team in its efforts going forward. So I don't know as we're actually considering a vote, but perhaps a consensus, a verbal consensus as to which direction you'd like to see us go.
Just to follow up on that, I think the three segment plan is really good. And I think it clearly makes the most sense to prioritize the middle section, since that's the easiest, quickest to get permitted.
Certainly. And
It sounds
I would like
like.
to point out that the three segments that Mr. Creed highlighted here is somewhat of a refinement from the, I believe, 5 or 6 potential sections that we've seen before. So there has been some thought and effort put into the treatments between the last time they were here and when they're here now, to try to minimize, I think, the cost and the complexity of the design and construction effort.
Yeah, and then obviously I think the one big piece of information we need, of course, is the cost of doing that section too, and then we can determine if I'm assuming we're not going to have enough money to do 2 sections.
Well, I think that as Olson proceeds ahead with the design, and now that they have a good idea, as Mr. Creed elaborated on, as they have a good idea of the depth, it's going to impact the cost of putting those breakwaters in, because they may now have to extend to a deeper depth. So the cost may increase, so that may decrease the amount of linear footage of project that we can accomplish. But again, that will happen during the next phase of the design, where they can refine the construction effort or the cost effort.
It makes perfect sense to do the 3 phases as outlined, and to me, phase 2 is the priority, just for no other reason, because we can get it done in our time frame and hopefully with the amount of money we have.
Is there a downside to putting the stone in and causing erosion west of that? Because if it takes us another couple of years to get the other part done, because as I understood you to say, once you start putting big structures in, it washes away the sand. So am I going to have another hole going up to Bay Street on
Right,
the?
so this is the strategy here. So let's focus on the red line. On the western edge, in this approach, it would tie into the Corps' revetment. So you already have a structure in place there. You're not going to exacerbate a structure effect by doing.
Going down to that and not further west of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because when we go to this alternative, I'm proposing to improve the beach. Build a breakwater and a sand beach, even seaward of the Corps' revetment. So there would be a pretty significant improvement along that entire area there. And getting back to the cost, obviously the revetment is going to be the most predictable and least cost approach.
So my question, let me refine my question. The core stone that is there now, I am led to believe, is part of the reason why we have that bulge there that goes to Bay Street that we have to fill in now.
Well, there was an ongoing erosion problem there that the Corps addressed to protect the lift station.
Correct, but did that
it may-
exasperate the other?
Yeah, I mean, maybe some, but it was going on anyway.
Okay.
It was gonna happen whether or not the Corps put that revetment there or not.
Okay.
You know, if the Corps didn't put the revetment there, the lift station will be in the water. And so, I mean, it was kind of, you had to do it.
Oh, I'm not suggesting that the Corps was wrong. I just want to make sure that if we do something, we're not going to wash away the western beach because it could be years,
Well,
literally years before we get more money.
Right, with the red,
Because
I'm
encouraging,
sorry to
I'm
interrupt
in agreement with John. I just want to make sure we're not going to do something to cause a bigger problem.
we will look at that and we will address that question when we talk about phasing. I don't know that I can answer that question today satisfactorily, but concern noted, and we will look at that, and we'll make sure that is addressed.
We're losing the sidewalk rapidly.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And so we've discussed, I mean, we have 187,000 to put toward putting in the big stones. So am I understanding correctly that you don't think that's the right thing to do? Because your red line stops where there are existing stones, which don't protect the sidewalk.
I don't know exactly what's being done. I haven't seen the plan, so I can go look at it afterwards. Clearly, something had to be done. I am familiar with the problem there. There are several ways you can address that, and so. Yeah, go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Again, I think the improvements that you're referring to are what we're considering emergency repairs, and they are intended as such. And I don't think that would, we would hope that those repairs would become, I don't want to say unnecessary, but certainly we would supplement them with whatever the design yields as an opportunity to enhance the shoreline in that area. So it is intended.
Become part of the
It may.
later project.
It may be that some of the materials that are used there can be utilized in other areas of the improvements, because certainly we are sizing it, or it's been sized similar to what Mr. Creed referred to as the Army Corps protection of the lift station area. So that material can be reused elsewhere if it's.
Do you and Mr. Creed recommend that we go ahead with what we were planning?
In the Bay Street, in the area where we're losing it?
Where we were going to spend 187,000 and get big stones?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that would go a long way to curbing the imminent threat that the wave and other actions are causing through there.
I have,
So just being here as a general contractor, and most people know me, I'm Jesse McPherson with McPherson Marine Services. Just as far as the economics of the job go, I think that with the $5 million budget, and from what I've gathered from our representatives, we've got another $5 million that has been verbally promised to us for this project in the next few years. Now, there is a time constraint that we have to work under, but I think in observance of the Southport waterfront, I believe that western end is the most immediate thing we need to do. So, because you're right, the revetment downtown at the park is more stable than the sand breakwaters. So I think, and that's the most expensive portion of the job. Would you agree, Chris?
What portion is that?
The western end where we have to go put the attenuation.
I don't know. It's you do have. It's hard for me to say, but yeah, it could be. I mean, a goal would be to get this all done for $5 million. I don't know that that's possible. I think you have a better chance with this approach that's shown in this graphic right here with the sand breakwaters, revetment, and living shoreline to work within the $5 million budget, and not need another $5 million. If we go to something like this, you're going to need another appropriation. This is going to be very expensive and complicated to build. And so that's the best I can answer that.
Well, so that being said, we just saw the pictures a few minutes ago of the old fort where they renourished that beach. Now, the conversation turns to who owns the beach. Well, I think that's already defined in our laws, which is, mean high water. So that allows our city people to be able to go and walk on the beach as it has before, but it does gain Mr. Tommy Harrelson some property. But he's already lost the property, so I don't see any problem with that, okay? The second thing, as a contractor, I'm dealing with riparian waivers all the time, okay? I have never seen a riparian waiver stand past the point of the expiration of the permit. You understand? So if someone said, yes, I'm going to waive my right to riparian rights so that, or my 10-foot setback zone or whatever, then that permission has to be granted again during the next portion of the thing. Now, that being said, I'm not a lawyer either, but I'm sure that we could clarify that through our camera regulatory agency. So, and I'm happy to reach out. As a matter of fact, I'll do it for curiosity. But I think that the homeowners' concern was that they would no longer have access, and I don't believe that to be the case at all. I think they could still erect their docks, and I think it would protect their shoreline immensely. So anybody can reach out to me. I'm happy to spend as much time with anybody as I can. I've got a personal interest here. My family lives here. We're raising our family here. We love Southport. So please reach out to me. I'm happy to take a walk, have a discussion, anything like that I can do to help get this thing done. Because it's sad when you walk down there and waves are breaking on your ankles right there at the thing. So that would be my suggestion. Start with the most expensive, most difficult to permit, and then move from there, because I do believe that with our political contacts in House and Senate, I think we can probably get funding for the rest. But by all means, if this project can be done for $5 million, let's do it. I mean, so it's and get the best you can get. So I would prefer to see the breakwaters as opposed to the revetment, because having worked in the industry, revetment's not always the best, and with the breakwaters you can actually gain some back. So even though it's more difficult to permit and it might be a little bit more expensive, it's way more of a long-lasting procedure, just based on what I've seen in my personal non-engineer experience. So thank you.
Thank you. And go ahead.
Just
Go ahead,
a
Greg.
quick clarification on the property rights. We looked into this last time, and when you use public funding to create beach and uplands, the property rights of the owner stop at the mean-high water line at the time of construction. So then any new beach that goes beyond that is public trust. So they don't lose property rights, but they potentially lose their riparian rights to build a pier there, because there's now upland in front of them.
That's the same thing as if you put spoil in front of their property, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's state funded, or,
Right.
yeah, so, just that. That's right.
Sorry, my question was, your experience is that it would end at the mean high water line?
The time of the work.
If you were talking about public funding for creating new beaches, then in that case, the private property rights end at the mean high water line. Is that correct?
At the time of construction, right. You can't use public funds to give someone additional public or private property, yeah.
Have you ever seen a way around that?
That's what we were looking into last time with easements. So we were looking at ways to address that in the past. The attorneys were looking at potentially getting easements that specifically accounted for that. So there may be some way that the state property office can issue an easement to those landowners that says, we grant you an easement to the mean high water and you have riparian rights. Something along those lines. But need to look at by the attorneys.
Well, I think
We
I
have
think that ought to be a priority. Number one is to meet with attorney and meet with the citizens that this is going to directly impact, because that's, may affect how you approach whatever you approach. My question is also with the revetment, and I've got yet another plan, which was an older plan, which I thought, which this expands the revetment, I guess, with the red line. That's what you're doing there. That's much broader than this was. But do we not already have, rightly or wrongly, revetment and protection and bulkheads in the area you've got sort of delineated in red?
Yes, so to the right, the appropriateness of that revetment may be okay. So maybe there doesn't have to be any money spent there at that point. But around that wooden wall, there needs to be something done because it does continue to fail. It's too low. It's getting over top more frequently. When you go out there, you'll see the scour holes behind the wall. That's bad. We want to stop that because it ultimately can result in wall failure. And so, a revetment is in a situation like this is a better shore protection hard structure because it does have some wave dissipation characteristics where the wall does not. The wave just reflects off the wall. You got the full force of the wave. With the revetment with the slope, you get some wave dissipation on that. And I would anticipate that wall needs to be raised also, and that would go into the sea level rise conversation. How high do we want that wall to go? And it's a balance between shore protection and flooding protection and aesthetics. I mean, obviously, high is better, but it looks terrible, and so you need to have that conversation too.
You predict a 30-year high?
The state has guidance on
net-
that. The state,
Right.
obviously, I would recommend that the city, given obviously it's a public project, to follow the guidance from the state. I forget what their numbers are right now. I look at them in all these different states in the southeast, and they're all a little different. So, but there are published values that the state suggests using for a 30-year projection. And I don't know how often they update those, but we obviously would seek to follow the latest guidance during the design process.
Just out of curiosity, let's assume that the ruling from, or the legal side of the house says that the city is going to own the new beach, and the property line rights stop at the mean high water line now.
Pre-project mean high
Okay.
water.
And one homeowner says, I don't like that. Does that stop the whole project?
I'm not sure that's going to be my decision. I mean,
Okay.
it will affect the integrity of the project
Okay.
from a design perspective.
So, I mean, they could do that for whatever reason they have, but that would impact, their property would continue to wash away because we wouldn't be doing anything for it.
Yeah.
So they would have less property every year. So it may be a trade-off between, do you want the wave hitting your front door and Bay Street disappear, or do you want to give up the ability to build a dock that you've never built a dock on before?
That's right.
Okay,
Some decisions have to be made by both sides.
thank you.
So, so what's best for the good of society? This waterfront stabilization is not just for Southport, it's for our state and for our nation. So we have the public here, we have members of the committee, Waterfront Steering Committee, and I would like to call any of them up. If you have questions, please come up, comments, please come up to the podium.
My question is the scope of the project. And I want to know if it goes from the west city limits all the way to the east city limits. The overall scope covers the waterfront along that whole area of this project. I can't tell from that up there.
4,000 feet. Mr. Jarvis, do you want to give him the exact? From
Part of it
American
is
Fish to.
That's what we need direction
Yeah.
from all of you.
We need the
We've
whole
got to have
waterfront.
that today in order to figure it out. We don't, I mean, I know what you decided in January, February, but do you still want to go on with that path, knowing you've got a timetable and you have limited funds? And also remember, soft costs are going to eat up a lot of this money. So you need to know that too. So I don't know if there's an answer for you, Mr. Fisher, until the board decides today what direction they want to take here.
Well, the scope has to cover the whole city limits on the waterfront. Whoever, based on the water, to ensure that each taxpayer gets benefit from it. You can't just rule out one area because it's private property.
The direction that the board gave to staff and the consulting, the direction that the board gave to staff and the consulting firm that we've retained was to evaluate from the yacht basin area up to the Bonnets Creek area.
Bonnets Creek.
And that's where, that was the direction that we were given some months ago, I believe.
Yeah, but what about the rest of the city from Bonnets Creek to the other end of the city limits on the east side? With the erosion going on up there. I personally have, since they moved the Bald Head Ferry up, have lost 143 foot of marsh grass. But now it belongs to the state. So my question is, the scope should cover the whole entire city. And I know there's a little section up on the east side that's not in the city, but other than that.
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, I can't comment on the directives to proceed further than the project limits. I'm assuming that if the goals are accomplished here, that it may be potentially in the future that the board and the residents want to consider expanding that project westward and northward as to address some of the issues that you reflect. But again, that's within the board's. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, eastward. I apologize. Yes.
There is a problem in that area. Sounds like it is. Then we should look at the entire waterfront in that regard. I know this is only the 4,000 foot, but we should include that at some point. If the board agrees with that, I think that would be important to look at the entire city limit waterfront. A very good point. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Who else would like to come up? Mr. Harrelson.
I'm Tommy Harrelson, and I live at 202 West Bay, and interestingly enough, we don't have the waterfront. That one lot does not have riparian rights for some reason. I don't know why. We bought it that way. But I was pleased to be chairman of the committee, and we had very good attendance, and Alderman John Russell was actually our staff. John Allen was our staff person, so he did a great job. And we had very good participation, and some of them are here. DJ, stand up if you will. Anybody else? And Darrell Fisher, Paul Fisher, and Frank Marchetti. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you all for your service, and we had others that are still interested in this. And we have been frustrated by the length of time it's taken to get anything. We were, talking, it was 9-10 years ago that we were doing this. And we don't see, and now we're talking about losing the sidewalk. And had something been done in timely fashion, we wouldn't be talking about that. They would have been done, and we would, some of this, but I think this, I'm not blaming this board at all, or the mayor, or the current staff, but this is frustrating for us. And thank you all for finally getting something going. Whatever you do, it's going to be better than doing nothing. So we're pleased that it's on the front burner, you're doing something, and whatever you do, you have our support. I do have a question, though, that it's always been on my mind. We were always told that you couldn't use sand from the river to re-nourish our beach. But what is different about our beach from Oak Island, Bald Head? Why can't you? And I think they do it in other parts of the state on riverine beaches. So I was told that, but I think that should be part of the solution too. Beach renourishment, using the sand that they're dredging up, and use that for our beaches all the way across. That would go a long way to preserving the coastline as we remember it, some of us. And I remember Hurricane Hazel too, by the way. I'm that old. But thank you all. I want to say this. Thank you. I appreciate that you're having we don't think that wall is going to be very pretty. That rock wall is not pretty. It doesn't look, it looks more like New Jersey than North Carolina, but you have to do what you have to do, and we appreciate your emergency situation that you're dealing with it. But keep, as Margaret Thatcher once told Ronald Reagan, don't go wobbly on us. Keep pushing ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Harrelson, and thank you for your service with that committee, and thank you, committee members, for being here.
Mayor, Heather has some information to share.
Welcome, Heather. She's director of our Parks and Recreation.
I'm just going to address the Bay Street emergency repair issue. Yesterday, Tom Stanley and Tom Z, and I met with Tara McPherson from CAMA, and basically, and you can drive by there and see there's that one section where the fence, orange fencing is, that that area is totally compromised now. The erosion has come under there, and so Tara said that moves that section to exemption status, so that we do not have to go through the permitting process to do an emergency repair on that section. But now that's not, we were wanting to extend it out, to join the revetment that's already there and then kind of taper it down. But yes, she said that does qualify for an exemption. If we need to go in there and save that section that's compromised.
Heather, would that be the area that we talked about before?
Yes.
The same that last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
That takes us around from where the rocks are to protect the lift station around that curve?
Yeah. What it'll definitely take us is to join the revetment like we had planned, that's already there from the Corps. And the exemption would extend to the end of the orange fence, and then we would have to curve it and bring it out. Now, the permit would come in if we extended it further across and tapered it down and then curved it. So there's a portion of that doesn't need a permit now. That's how it was explained to us yesterday. It does not. It's called an exemption.
Heather, so that's only a portion of what you were planning as the emergency repair?
It's the majority of it.
Is it? So that we're not creating something that's not going to protect and function the way that it was designed?
Yeah, no, we're not creating a problem because the design will have it curving out toward going back into the river instead of just tapering it down and stopping.
Thank you. That's great news. And so, in answer to Mr. If you know engineers, the answer to his question, can you put sand on the riverbanks? Does that work as a mitigation tool?
From the river dredging itself, lots of people are fighting over that sand. That does exist. Where it is available is further offshore, like closer to the mouth of the river. So it'd be one reason we've never considered it for this project is the dredging process is very complicated and expensive. And it usually is only most cost effective when you're dealing with very, very large quantities of sand and like 500,000, multiple million yards. That's where dredging comes into place, and you have to have a place to physically operate. So given this relatively small quantity, tens of thousands of yards of what we looked at here, even though it's more expensive from the upland mines, it's more cost effective long term. And just it's always been, how would we get it here, with the dredge? And so it's many, many miles away. You say you'd have to use a hopper dredge or something. It's just complicated. And in my opinion, without exploring it in detail, it would be more expensive. It's about location, right? Moving material is about distance and complexity with that. So I still believe, even though it's inexpensive on a unit basis, upland sand is your most cost-effective material for the scope of this project.
Thank you. Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like an opinion. I know, come on. Yeah. Because for me, looking at how we are approaching this and what's critical and that sort of thing, it would occur to me that phase one it has a huge amount of pressure on it for continued erosion? Would that
Yes,
just
it
based
does.
on conditions?
Yes.
Where we have a lot of revetment and some not as functional as it needs to be, or where are the pressures greater between those two? Because to me, I would like to
think
start
your
with
problems-
phase
I mean,
one.
your problems are most immediate in section one because of the road, obviously, and whether or not this emergency treatment, what the longevity of that's going to be before it causes a problem somewhere else is unknown at this point. So it's important to go ahead and work to address that, given that you got a legal hurdle to get over there, but that should be a priority. And then I think the middle section, particularly along the wooden wall, is also a priority. I mean, you know, every time you have a storm, there's some level of change there that you got to put an orange fence up and keep people away from it and go back and fix things here and there. It would be nice that not be a problem. So that would be my priority too. The living shoreline to the west, obviously, is probably your least immediate concern. Those shore protection needs are in the hands of the private owners right now. It would be nice to have a nice contiguous project. Beaches and shoreline restoration work well when you treat the entire system, and that's why we've always focused on the 4,000 feet to the creek, to the east. So yeah, you could prioritize 1 and 2 as a problem, but I would encourage it from the study perspective. We want to keep looking at it as a whole, and then we can prioritize once those come. But we can look at it incrementally, even in the study, and break them out in these individual pieces and talk about the pros and cons of each section, and then give you an opportunity to decide at that point. And you're really not going to be able to make ultimate decisions on which path you want to go until some legal issues are addressed and we know what the updated costs are going to be of some of these approaches within your funding. So it's really important to go to the study phase and update that study with a more focused, specific, hey, we generally know what the general concepts are that we want to pursue here. We have new information. It's been 4 years since we've looked at it. We know we have a legal issue that's never been treated. Let's try to deal with that, and then we can come up with, okay, here's what we got, and here's what we can go, here's what we can advance at this point in time. And we've talked to Greg about that. You know, if you dealt with the legal issue and you got that resolved, is there a benefit of permitting the whole thing, even if you're only going to build a piece of it because of limitations on funding? And that might give you leverage with the legislature later on to go say, hey, our goals are this big, we just don't have, we need more money to meet them. And so there's more conversations that need to be had, but the first step is understanding what the legal issue really means and what you can do in those areas 1 and 2 being priorities, and what the cost, what does this really look like now under current physical conditions and cost environment. So, answer your question? More of an answer than an opinion, but.
Just to summarize, it does sound to me that the board is concerned with what we'll consider section 1 and section 2, the western and the central section. And I believe if that's the sense that we're getting, that we'll work with our consultants, and their directive will be to concentrate perhaps with limited funding on addressing those sections, as much as those sections as we can, if the board is amenable to that.
That which is most vulnerable is what we should do. And John Allen, you being on the staff at the Waterfront Steering Committee, you know, you have more knowledge on this than anybody.
With what Bob just said, very much.
And if we can prioritize the legal conversation, going ahead and jumpstarting that, that's really critical.
List, and I'll work with Bob and Heather on that.
Any further comments from our public that's here?
Just to be sure, we just heard that it's wise to look at the whole project, but prioritize. So I hope that we give guidance that we do both. We prioritize and ask that Olson begins the process of looking at the whole project.
I can't see, where our focus is going to be on areas 1 and 2. Area 3, I'm pretty comfortable with what we've already talked about there. And it's not going to vary from what we've talked about in the past. We do want to update cost. given the current conditions that we understand for that. But in terms of making decisions, are really 1 and 2 are where the priorities are going to be.
And then we will bring it back to you in November to approve the contract with Olson for those items. And then I'll have a full report from the city attorney by then, too.
Any other comments or questions from the public? Okay, board, any other questions?
I do think, to Mr. Fisher's conversation, that once we know what things are costing with the shoreline, if that's what you would be recommending on down in the future, that would be certainly something, a conversation in the future.
Yes, I would present it more as facts to you. This is what it's going to cost, and then you guys can decide how you want to go about prioritizing and spending the available money. Yeah.
Madam Clerk.
I have a comment that was submitted by Brian Stevens. He's at 503 Cades Trail. I'm going to provide this to the board so that they can have it, and I'll also include it in the minutes. I'm going to summarize a little bit of what he has some concerns about, and that's a kayak launch. He said the issue of shoreline stabilization has been kicked around since he's been here, and is there any way to marry the construction of a shoreline stabilization program and provide paddlers access to the waterfront? If we put large boulders along the shoreline to protect it, will there be access through the wall of rocks or around them to continue a launch around the beach?
Bob.
I think that's a very viable question. However, I think we're too early in the design process to deal in the finite elements like a kayak launch. Certainly, we have the kayak launch where the design and permitting is underway near the Morning Star Marina area. To supplement that, again, is something that we would have to consider well into the design process.
That section 1 is a sand beach, so you'd still have access to it. Plus, the feedback I remember us getting was that launching directly into the river and the ICW was not ideal anyway because of the winds and the currents, and the best place to do it was a la where we're doing it at Cottage Creek. So.
I have a full update for you, the board, on this, our current kayak launch project tomorrow night. Heather and Bob are working on a timeline for me, and I'll hand that out and summarize it for you.
Thank you. So now, managers' comments. Any further comments? Board comments, Mr. Allen, Alderman Alt. Any comments from the board? Reverend Davis, Mr. Lombardi. Okay, Pro Tem. All right, good. Well, this has been an excellent meeting, and I want to thank the engineers, and I want to thank everyone for coming here. Jesse McPherson, thank you for bringing the construction aspect to it. But engineers, God bless you. That's all I got to say. I mean, without that input, we couldn't get it done. So now I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session. Second by Mr. Lombardi, a first by Alderman Allen. Any further discussion?
I'd like to make some remarks and open discussion. We are going into public session, closed session rather, as we state in the agenda, to discuss real estate matters. And I gotta get to Bob. Okay, certainly. Okay. We have accurately stated, I think, to establish or instruct the public body or staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating price and other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase option, exchange, etc. We talked about this in closed session on October the 5th, and we, by a, 3-2 vote, I believe, instructed the city manager to entered negotiations about making an offer. And after the meeting, I questioned, after the fact, after we had adjourned, whether we should have made that a decision in a closed session. And the city manager passed this to the city attorney, and he has supplied us with an opinion and also gave us a document from the School of Government that specifically outlines what can and cannot be discussed, what can be voted on, and also what must be disclosed. We did not do any of that. What we are required to do is name the property location, name the property's current owner, and the purpose for which the city plans to use the property. No, we're not. We are discussing a potential. No, we are not. It is not. This is very specifically spelled out. The School of Government document said that we have to disclose this before we even go into public session. I don't have a law license. I am referring to the legal opinion that the expert from the School of Government, I'm in the middle of answering your question, sir. Okay, I'm sorry I'm taking up your time.
So what we'll do, the city manager has an excellent recommendation that we'll just, when the city attorney is here tomorrow, we'll go into closed session with the attorney and take it from there.
I agree. That's what I was trying to say.
Did you not read what we were sent? The documents and the legal opinion that she referred?
They were not sent that. They were not sent that, Lo. I sent it to you.
Oh,
because you were
okay.
questioning this.
All right.
But you're the only one who received that. So that's why we need to have Brady in a closed session tomorrow night under attorney-client privilege to stop this once and for all, one way or the other.
Will you forward these documents to the rest of the aldermen?
Glad to, but it's bizarre. Anyways,
Well, again, board, good work today. I think we have we summarized what we need to do on waterfront stabilization and erosion control, and I thank you for that. We're moving forward, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn. It's a unanimous motion to adjourn. All in favor? Motion carried. No, we never went into closed session.